For weeks now, Hawaii has been the site of protests over the construction of a telescope on a sacred mountain. But the conflict actually goes back quite a ways. And joining us now to break down what exactly the protests are about, what the stakes are, and where this might go in the future is Professor of Political Science at the University of Hawaii, Noelani Goodyear-Kapua. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Aloha, John. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And so, look, there's a few different aspects of this I'd like to talk about, but for people who might not have seen this, and honestly, I have not seen much mainstream news coverage of these protests. What is actually going on? What are the protests are about?
Well, we're getting to about a month now where folks have been camped out at the base of Mauna Kea access road. So the beginning of it was the establishment of a pu'uhonua, which in Hawaiian culture is a place of refuge, it's a sanctuary, it's a safe place. So that was established on July 14th, And then on July 15th, when the construction was scheduled to begin, there were hundreds of people who gathered to block the road from machines that would be moving up the mountain. And since then, there has been a front line primarily held down by elders and respected community leaders, knowledge keepers of our peoples who have continued to hold that base of the Mauna Kea access road.
So as you point out, the announcement that the construction was going to begin happened last month, but there has been concerns about this construction taking place for years now, correct?
For years, yeah. The 30-meter telescope and the resistance against it has been going on for about 10 years now. And prior to that, there were also efforts that successfully stopped about a dozen telescopes from being built on Mauna Kea. There are 13 that currently are on the mountain, but this is of another scale. This would be an 18-story building about the size of a football field. It would be the largest building on the island. And so people are opposed to it because it's a sacred place. It's also conservation land. And it's land that was illegally seized from the Hawaiian kingdom without the consent of the people or our government. And since then, for over 100 years now, Hawaiians have been continuously asserting our claims to these lands.
And so I've read that the concern is that, look, this would be a gigantic building, obviously. I believe I read that it would be the largest telescope in the Northern Hemisphere, but also that there would be a lot more traffic in the area. And previously, buildings had been built that had not been specifically allowed. And so if this were to be built, the concern is also that there could be additional buildings, roads, traffic, and those sorts of things. It could become an even bigger issue in the future, right?
Right, so within state law, this is a conservation district, and the final environmental impact statement for the 30-meter telescope acknowledged that the cumulative impact of all of the telescopes that are currently residing on Mauna Kea has caused substantial environmental, cultural harm. And what it says is that adding one more would be incremental harm on top of that. So it rationalizes further destruction of the mountain by the fact that there has been already destruction that's gone on. So what the dissenting opinion in the Hawaii Supreme Court case on the permit for the telescope, what that opinion stated, Justice Michael Wilson, was that this degradation principle is totally unacceptable, that we shouldn't rationalize further destruction of our environment because there has already been destruction of it.
And that's certainly been a concern throughout the islands. This island in particular, though, in Hawaiian culture has a significant place, right?
Well, the mountain itself, this is the tallest mountain on the island. From the base of the ocean floor to the top of the mountain, it's actually the tallest mountain on Earth, if you measure it all the way from the bottom of the ocean. For us as Kanaka, the mountain Mauna Kea is another way of saying that shortened version Mauna Kea is an ancestor. It is a home of many deities, deities who are embodied in water forms like Poliahu, Lilinoi. They take bodily forms that remind us why this is a sacred and important place, because it is the top of a watershed.
And so when trying to perhaps predict where this might go, if the protests will be successful, the thing that confuses me is that this is not the only location where this telescope could be constructed. And in fact, there are contingency plans to build it in Spain. Why is it that, considering the huge amount of protests, that plan is not being acted on?
Well, we know that the TMT has now applied for the permits to build in the Canary Islands. And the other thing we know about why this has not been moved already after a month of protests and 34 elders being arrested is there are tons of interest here that would like to see that foreign money, infused into the islands. It's part of a longer history of a particular economic model where foreign investment is prioritized over indigenous connections to land and the building of a more locally controlled economy. So it's not surprising to me that the powers that be would like this telescope to be sited here. But we have said over and over that there is no consent that's been given by the indigenous peoples of this place. And so we think that they should continue to pursue the possibility of moving it to the Canary Islands.
It's not very surprising to find out that economic concerns are driving this against the will of the people, but it is tragic. And we just want to thank you so much for joining us and breaking down the nature of the protests.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Here on the Damage Report, we talk a lot about the big banks and their ways of getting rich off the poor. They saturate the market, but there are other options. And I've got info on a socially and environmentally responsible financial institution that has no ATM fees, gives you cash back on every purchase. They even commit 10% of their earnings to charity. It's called Aspiration, and if you go to aspiration.com/TYT to sign up, you'll get these perks, and that's more money to spend or to save or to spend. Just treat yourself.